In many sports, teams change their strategies depending on the game situation. With a big lead at the end of the game, a football team will start running the ball to run the clock down, and if victory is assured, they may even just take a knee rather than run a play, just to run out the clock entirely and secure victory. The same holds true in curling. We play different strategies when we have the lead than when we're behind, and those strategies can become even more divergent when we get late in a game and we know exactly what's needed to win or how much we need to get back in the game. One of the most defensive strategies in curling is the throw-through, when you purposely throw a rock that won't end up in play. Typically, you'll see this done mostly in the final ends of games, though in more competitive play, you can sometimes see teams start to do this earlier with a big enough lead. Let's take a look at some of the reasons why we should throw through in certain situations, as well as a couple times when it's probably not appropriate to make that throw through. The first thing to understand is the philosophy behind throwing through. Any rock in play can help promote scoring. Guards are an obvious example. When we put up a guard, the other team can go around it, and the more guards that are in play, the more points that are likely or at least possible to be scored in an end. Rocks in the house actually promote less to scoring, especially early in an end. Let's say you throw a rock down to the top 4 without hammer. That's not going to be easy to use against you, but the other team may be able to freeze to it, or may play a soft tap to knock your rock into the back of the house. Later on in the end, if there are several rocks in the back of the house, this can create jam opportunities and make it more difficult to remove your opponent's rocks. So in that way, it is possible for rocks in the house also to be used against you. When we throw through, we prevent that possibility entirely. We don't get anything we can use in play, but neither does our opponent, and when we have a big enough lead, that's the only thing we care about, denying opportunities to the other team, not creating them for ourselves. So first, let's look at some final end scenarios where it's obviously correct to throw through. First of all, when you don't have hammer, it's probably best to throw through, unless your opponent gives you something to hit, when you're in the final end with a lead of 4 points or greater. Many people will also advocate throwing through with a lead of 3 points, and I'm going to discuss that particular situation in the next section. When we have the hammer, things are a little bit more complicated. If our opponent makes a mistake and doesn't leave anything at all in play, we are probably going to throw through with the hammer pretty much anytime we have a lead of 2 or more points. We might even consider throwing through with the hammer when we're up only 1 point and there's no rocks in play. The reason for that is we don't have to generate any scoring whatsoever in that situation, so we can wait for our opponents to do something before we react. On the other hand, in a tie game, it's sometimes useful, especially for most of us who aren't world-class curlers, to throw one rock into the rings in the corner of the house. The point of this is to give what I like to call a saver, a rock that will score if we have to hit and roll out on our final rock. You'd be surprised how often that happens, where you end up using that rock as the game-winning point. And there have definitely been people who have had an open hit and stick to win who wish they had a saver when they ended up hitting and rolling out and going to an extra end instead. When you're tied or up one with the hammer and the other team actually puts up a center guard, you will have some decisions to make, but you probably won't throw through. Chances are you'll either play the tick shot or a draw around, depending on your team's preferences, and that's a topic for another video. When up 2 or more with the hammer, though, I like throwing through even if the other team throws that first center guard. I certainly don't like playing a tick shot here because you open up the potential for leaving multiple guards the other team can use. And when you do that, you definitely raise the risk that they'll have multiple places to hide and you could be facing 2 or 3 or more rocks when it comes down to the skip rocks and your chance to win the game. To summarize, we're going to throw through when we're up 4 or more without the hammer, and we're probably going to throw through when we're up 2 or more with the hammer as well. The exception to this, of course, is if the other team does put a rock in the house that we're allowed to hit, you'll hit that rock rather than throw through. We don't want to let the other team build something if we don't have to. And of course, if the free guard zone rule didn't exist, we'd be peeling guards from the first rock as well. You'll note that there's one situation I didn't cover yet that I talked about earlier. That's that being up 3 without hammer in the final end situation. A lot of skips like throwing through here, and before the 5 rock rule, it was pretty much automatic that you'd throw through without hammer with a 3-point lead. However, I don't think that situation is nearly as clear-cut now with the 5 rock rule, even at more casual levels of play. And in fact, I would recommend against the automatic throw through here. Let's take a closer look at the situation on the strategy board to talk about why I feel this way. Okay, let's break down that situation where you're up 3 without the hammer and you're thinking about throwing through. So let's say you're yellow in this situation, and yes, you throw your first rock through the house. Red with the hammer down 3 is going to set up a corner guard. So with a 3-point lead again, you commit to throwing through unless they put something in the house, so they do it again. Your opponents with the hammer are going to set up another corner guard, most likely. Some opponents might do 2 on the same side. Just for the sake of illustration here, we'll do 1 on each side of the house. And finally, on your third rock, hey, you still can't hit anything. It's the final rock of the 5 rock free guard zone, so another one goes through. The hammer team now gets to throw again and puts a rock behind the guard, one of the guards. Now, here's what's happened already. You've gone through your first 3 rocks accomplishing nothing and letting the hammer team have 3 rocks to set up their ideal situation. Now, that doesn't mean the other team's going to score 3, but chances are they're going to threaten to. And it's even possible, especially when we get into more casual play, league play, even pretty high-level, club-level play, that mistakes will be made from here on out. If you nose a hit on a guard or you flash a hit on a rock in the house, suddenly you could have put a loss into play out of nowhere. And even if it goes well, let's say you peel the guard successfully. This is the best case scenario. They'll go behind the other guard. You'll probably hit this open rock and hopefully roll out, or you might try to roll in, but for the sake of this, we'll say you roll out. They come around again. You manage to peel the second guard. And now they will start trying to put that guard back. And what you'll end up in a situation is you'll end up in a situation where it's actually pretty well set up for red to get 3 here. You can keep peeling the guard, and they can keep putting it back, and then you can throw a rock in on your last one, and here, as we can show as an example, we peel this rock. They put the guard back with your last rock. You have to put one in place somewhere. You might try to make some sort of freeze that just outcounts them. But if you don't make it perfectly, and even if you do, they may be able to come down and bop this out, get their 3, and they've gotten to an extra end. Now again, that's not a disaster. You'll have the hammer in the extra end, but it's not what we're looking to do. It's not the kind of control we want. And in that whole situation, we were left with a lot of ways we could go wrong. Earlier on in the end, when the other team has this rock behind the guard, you might hit it out, but leave a guard so that you're still partially guarding this rock. And there are 2 guards to use. From there on in, the red team can start building an end. So with this in mind, my preference as we reset the board is to throw like top 4 here. The other team is still going to try to set up their corners, but you can throw a couple top 4 rocks. They've set up their corners. You can now guard your rock. And now you've given the hammer team a lot to deal with here. Your rocks are not in a particularly risky formation for giving up more points. Yes, it could happen, but it's going to be difficult for the opposing team to both break down your center and use those corner guards effectively. Can you still give up 3 playing this way? Sure. Could you make an argument for just throwing the third one in so that the other team can't use your center guard? Sure, although I like the tight center guard, or at least some separation here to make a run back harder. In any case, I think this method of play is much more effective with a 3-rock lead under the 5-rock rule. Under the 4-rock rule, throwing through made a lot more sense when the other team could only get their 2 guards up, and then you could start hitting on your 3rd rock. Now that you have to wait an extra rock, I think it's much more effective and much safer to just go into the house with a 3-point lead. Of course, it's possible to throw through before the final end as well, and when your lead is big enough, you may be tempted to do this. In competitive play, this is absolutely the right call. You'll see teams start throwing through, or at least throwing 1 rock through, to limit the amount of rocks in play, with leads of like 4 or 5 points with a couple ends left, or even earlier. I think the earliest I've ever thrown through was up 11 in a playdowns game with 4 ends to play. The other team wanted to keep playing, which was absolutely fine, but I didn't want to take any chances that we'd make some mistakes by just being careless and suddenly give up a 4 or 5 or more and now feel some pressure because the other team just picked up a big end. The other main time we might throw through comes at the conclusion of an end, usually on the hammer skip's final shot. If the skip sees absolutely no shot that can improve the situation and doesn't want to risk actually hurting the situation by knocking an opponent's rock in or knocking one of their rocks out or anything like that, they may throw through just as a way of finishing off the end and taking the result as it stands. You may also do this to throw through just to blank an end on your last rock when there is nothing in play, or at least nothing in the house. One quick tip on these throw-throughs: you don't have to waste these shots entirely. You can find a line you haven't thrown yet, or a type of shot you haven't thrown yet, say a control weight hit coming off the center line, and throw that as though it is a real shot in the game. This might give you information or help you better understand what a line is doing, with no actual risk of making or missing a shot. Just be careful that the shot you pick is actually safe and can't cause any damage. Okay, so those are the times we do throw through, but when shouldn't we throw through? Well, for one, I'm really not a fan of throwing through on casual league nights. On a league night that isn't a particularly competitive one, everyone's there to have fun. And in that spirit, they want to play actual games. Watching someone on the other team throwing through isn't really a fun time, and you shouldn't start doing that and then hitting everything out of play just to secure a win on a 6-end pizza night. This is especially true before the last end, but I'd say that when it comes to the most casual of leagues, even throwing through in the last end is kind of a real faux pas. A lot of the players who are going to be in that league are new and just trying to learn the game and throw some rocks, and you're kind of taking that opportunity away by throwing through. That said, of course we want to play to win a game in most situations, and you don't have to be super aggressive in those situations. You can still play more conservatively, make sure you put rocks in the house, not calling for guards. But try to keep the ends more interesting and more full of play than you would in a competitive environment where you'd be happy to just clean out the action and deny your opponents any chance to score. Yeah, it might cost you a game once in a blue moon, but for the most part it won't change your results too much, and everyone will have a better time on what's supposed to be a fun night. You also shouldn't throw through on a league night if your opponent has already indicated that they just want to throw the rocks back and have effectively soft conceded. This often happens when a team is down by 5 or 6 or more and just wants to throw the rocks back towards the warm room end, usually in the 6th end or the 8th end of a game. When this happens, just be gracious and play out the end with them. Oftentimes, if you're not sure if they're conceding, you can even ask if they want to call the game off essentially, but still throw the rocks back and play an end, just to remove any doubt. I hope this video has given you a better idea of when you should throw through in a curling game, and maybe it's not such a great idea. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and keep coming back to Chess on Ice for more content all throughout the curling season.